Hello F1 fans, welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with me, David and Harry, and today we'll have the second part of our heated discussion about our hottest F1 takes. After the last episode, which was really heated in the end, especially after David's take, we're here for part 2, and today we can start from Harry's hot take.
Alright, my hot take is connected to a driver who raced a long time ago. And I'm speaking of one of the best drivers of all time, in my opinion. So my hot take is that Juan Manuel Fangio should be in the GOAT debate. And I know what you're going to say. I'm going to present arguments. Also, I'm reading on the internet that people are saying that it is quite a different era. It was way different back then in the 50s. But still, I think there are enough arguments to say that he deserves to be in the discussion. So let's start off by saying that he has the highest winning percentage and pole percentage out of all F1 drivers, and his pole percentage is 55.77, achieving 29 poles from 52 entries. Then his winning percentage is 46.15, which is 45 out of 52 races. Also, he won 5 titles for 4 different constructors, which is very impressive, I think. Not many drivers have achieved something similar. And also, he was quite old actually for an F1 driver, even though back then it was normal. He won his first title at the age of 40. And also, he had a pause in 1952 because he didn't get a seat with Alfa Romeo. And he also injured himself in a non-championship race. And overall, I have also researched quite a lot about Fangio. I've read that his driving style was impressive. Nobody could match it. He was always making sure to conserve the car because reliability back then was awful, as we know. And overall, I think that the stats and the words of people who were present at the races back then prove enough why he must be in the GOAT debate. And even though it was quite different to race back then, and it was not maybe as physically demanding, and it was not that high of speeds, for example. As we know, today drivers reach like 340 kilometers per hour. The cars were way slower, but still, I think that my arguments are enough to prove that he deserves to be there. What do you guys think?
Well, the GOAT debate is something very interesting in all sports, I can say. And my opinion reflects, I think, from the hours that I've spent watching sports content creators. And I can say, yeah, Fangio can be eligible, in my opinion, in this GOAT debate. But I think, as in every sport, that every era is very different. And all sports are becoming more and more modern, and that is why we cannot directly compare drivers from different eras, because what was the sport like during Fangio's era and during the era of Senna and Prost, and after that Schumacher, Alonso, Hamilton, Verstappen. We cannot compare these people, but I think that he can be considered at least in top 5, I can say, for sure. And that is why I think I am okay with this take, but at the same time, if we have to compare purely on ability, we don't really have an answer for that, because we cannot compare people that have 7 years separation difference in the time where they were driving in the F1. So that is why I think it is very hard to imagine what it would be like if drivers from different eras are compared. What do we compare them actually for? Because the cars they were driving during the 50s are nothing compared to the cars of the 2010s and 2020s.
Definitely agree that the gap in terms of eras is quite massive, and it's very difficult to compare. But I will say that Fangio's run in the 50s was extremely impressive, and something that we haven't seen in today's F1 in terms of winning 5 championships with 4 different teams, and 2 other seasons he was runner-up as well, always in the top places. And as Harry mentioned, he has the highest winning percentage, but you can say that that's due to the fact that they didn't drive nearly as many many races as they do today. I think that he is the greatest of that era, and probably if F1 ends in like in like 1990, you can consider him the GOAT for sure. But as Vasco mentioned, you have guys like Senna, Schumacher, Hamilton that have come along and have put themselves in that conversation, and some even achieving more championships than him. Very difficult to compare, but I would have to say that he is in the GOAT conversation. There was no one else that stood out in that era, so I think it's definitely a strong case.
Plus, there is another factor, I think, and that is recency bias. We have watched, for example, some races from the 50s, 60s, 70s, but only on tape, but nothing. We haven't been there. We don't know how people were feeling regarding Fangio at that time. So that is why I think it's really strange when we have to compare different eras. So there is not an answer to that take. But I think, yeah, specifically talking about the career of Fangio and the cars he was having back then, he can be considered for sure the greatest of his era and can be considered top 5 all time, I think.
All right, thank you for your responses. I really liked your arguments and opinions, and now we can move on to Vasco's take.
I'll keep it short and simple. My take is that the turbo hybrid era from 2014 actually till now is the most boring F1 era that we have seen ever. And yeah, there are seasons like 2016, like 2021, but overall I can say that if one of the teams can manage to make a really efficient car when they consider the regulations, there is like 90% chance of them running away with the championship and being far away from the rest of the competitors. And that makes F1 boring in a way, and everybody's complaining about, oh yeah, it's always the same winner, and whoever manages to get the regulations, they'll always win. And that have created, I think, a lack of suspense and a lack of really something that excites you in most of the races. And talking about especially the Hamilton era and right now the Verstappen having so many wins, I simply think that this era made F1 lose that sparkle, special feeling about the sport. What do you think?
I agree. The hybrid era has been quite underwhelming, it must be said, even though the majority of my life I've been watching the hybrid era. But, I watched some older races recently from the V8 era, and it just seemed so simple back then. In the cars, they were quite simple. There weren't 1 million buttons on the car, and you have to manage every single part in terms of energy, tires, fuel, things like that. It was really just simple racing, like go-karts in a way. And the cars were actually a lighter and easier to drive in comparison to now, which are the heaviest cars we've had in history and the fastest ones. And in terms of, I guess, the development of the car, it's been very impressive to see. But yeah, the drivers have become too reliant on the car, and therefore we see this big gap between different teams. We saw with Mercedes for a long time, now we see it with Red Bull, and overall just not as many exciting races. An average race now in comparison to an average race 15 years ago is, I would say, quite substantial, and that an average race 15 years ago is a good race right now. So I will have to agree that has definitely been the worst era of F1.
And I think two factors actually help my take, because 2007, 8, 9, 10 and 12, they really spoiled the fans, I think, with what happened, with all the scandals, controversies, competition till the last race. And I think F1 fans expected the same case at the beginning of the turbo hybrid era in 2014, but what happened was actually teams that are very cautious in what they're doing, and and teams that are not going, I think, all the way up for wins because they know how hard it is.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I think that as a result, drivers have started driving more cautiously. I mean, you don't see these random dive bombs or just trying to make a move around the outside, for example, which I don't even know when was the last time I saw a move around the outside. Drivers, they will sit there, wait patiently, wait for the DRS, use up their battery, and fly past down the straight to make sure that they have no contact whatsoever. Because also you might notice that race starts, I've rarely seen any chaos over the last 5 years. Extremely rarely do we have some kind of incident at the start. People are taking it super cautiously. They're thinking long term. No overtakes really in the first half of the race whatsoever, just so people can save tires. And, this is not racing. I mean, it's strategy, but there's no, buzz about people just sitting there and waiting until the end of the race to make one overtake because they're scared they will get in an incident.
And another thing is the technical development of the sport, which makes the cars much more reliable. And also F1 has become so global and so commercial that they have to be careful regarding everything. And especially in the technical direction, you never see, I think, in the future, again, things like refueling or more than one tire provider, and we will never see, I think, that crazy races that have been in the mythology of F1, like it was during the 19th and the first 10 years of the new century. Harry, your opinion on this?
I agree with both of you. I think that an argument in your favor is the fact that since the turbo hybrid era began, only 2 teams have won the Constructors' Championship. It's quite ridiculous when you think about it. It's only Mercedes and Red Bull. And this just proves that there is not enough competition. There is domination. As you said, when a certain team nails the regulations, then it's all over for the others. They're just like playing catch-up. And also about the battles, as you guys said, drivers are more cautious. For example, in 2008, I can think of the battle of Kubica and Massa in Japan, which was amazing wheel-to-wheel racing. We can't see anything like that in recent times. Also, you can't see a win like Vettel's one in Monza in 2008 with a Toro Rosso. I mean, why? We fans want such things to happen, but the new regulations cannot provide that.
Yeah, it seems like we'll never see something like Multi 21 again, or things like that are just spicing up the sport so much.
Yeah, a question just came up in my mind, and I would like to ask you guys what you think about it. But I feel like since the hybrid era, we've had quite a few regulation changes. But do you guys think that that's maybe harmful in terms of the teams that are trying to catch up because you're getting used to one regulation? Let's say in 2014, Mercedes nailed those regulations and teams were starting to catch up, and then 2017, new aerodynamics completely, and it's like teams have to start over once again. And then we saw these regulations went on until 2021, and we saw that Red Bull finally developed to being on equal terms with Mercedes, and then new regulations come in 2022, and now Red Bull are the clear leaders in terms of the regulations. And maybe this often change in the regulations is potentially hurting teams from getting closer to the top teams, if you get what I'm saying, because once you're at the top, it's difficult to go further and further when you maximize the regulations, and it'll allow for people to catch up. Whereas new regulations, it's like a new lottery in a way. Someone else can nail it and they'll be leagues ahead, just like we're seeing with Red Bull at the moment.
Well, but I think from what we've seen, this is the only logical solution, especially talking about the regulations from 2022. Mercedes were just too strong, and they've been too strong for 7 straight years. And in 2021, yes, Verstappen won because of Honda, because of his amazing ability, because of some controversial decisions, but nobody expected an actual fight before the start of the season. I think before the 3-day training, nobody expected Red Bull and Verstappen to be that close, but the regulations, it was known that they were going to be applied in the sport before the start of the season. So I think FIA simply they wanted to change something, and they did not really expect 2021 to be like that. So I'm actually in favor of new regulations, constant change, but it shouldn't affect the team so much so that they have to think of a whole new car, but probably talking about smaller and not that meaningful regulations that are still able to change something, to change the balance of powers.
Yeah, when you look back at the history of the sport, you can see that there have been constant regulation changes, like minor ones, and most of the time they have worked out. But in the recent times, as you said, it's maybe due to the team's ability. So we move on to David's take now.
Okay, so my take is that James Hunt is the most overrated Formula One world champion. I see Vasco already dying of laughter inside, but all of us have nostalgia with the movie Rush, for example, and everyone knows that's a fantastic F1 movie. I agree as well. I think any F1 fan should watch that movie. But that movie, in a way, and that 1976 season as a whole, really glorifies James Hunt way over proportion into what his actual career was like, because he did win the championship in 1976, but let's not forget that Niki Lauda did not race every race that season because of his serious crash at the Nürburgring. He missed 2 races, and James Hunt won one of those 2 races, and in fact gained 12 points on Niki Lauda throughout those 2 races, which at the time with that point system is huge. One race win was 9 points, and he ended up winning the championship by 1 point. And also in the very last race, Niki Lauda decided not to participate because he thought that the conditions were too dangerous. And it was almost in a way that championship was gifted for James Hunt. He did win it by 1 point, but it didn't really seem like it was a fair fight between the two, because I think if Niki Lauda had raced every race that season, he would have won the championship, no doubt. And, moving aside from that season alone, James Hunt at the very next season finished 5th in the championship, which was a pretty poor title defense, it must be said. And then the year after that, he's still driving for McLaren, dropped to 13th, and then his very last season in F1 after that did not score a single point in F1. I just think that if Niki Lauda didn't miss any of these races, no one would even know who James Hunt was. And I think that his championship is extremely overrated, and people should consider other factors like the fact that Niki Lauda did not race every single race.
You've stated the main argument here, and it is the movie Rush, which made a lot of people believe, and that is one thing I really like the movie, but there was one thing that I didn't like throughout the whole movie, and that was the way Niki Lauda was depicted. He was the good guy, actually. He was fighting against so many things throughout that season, and in the end he decided that he wants to prioritize his own safety. The movie, they depicted him as the villain, and I still don't know why that was. But yeah, James Hunt, he's not the most impressive F1 champion and probably one of the least impressive F1 champions, but I think because of the persona of James Hunt, he's regarded not as one of the best. Nobody will ever tell you that he's one of the best, but he's one of the most magnetic figures connect with the sport, and that is why I don't think he can be considered as one of the most overrated champions, because his season was really interesting, really special, and that is again part of the mythology of F1. I don't think he's the best, or he can be regarded even in the top 20 pilots of the F1, like ever, but still think that he deserves to be praised for everything that he has done, for his whole career, and for the way he actually managed to win the title. I think that there are actually more overrated world champions, and the first one for sure, Villeneuve. I think that is enough, but if you talk specifically about world championships, there are so many examples of people who haven't been that great or who don't really deserve the championship, but because what happened was, well, they had luck, and that is why they have won World Drivers title. And I think James Hunt had that luck, but there has been a lot of other examples throughout time. For example, in 2016, Nico Rosberg, because yeah, he was very impressive throughout the season, but if it wasn't for Malaysia, he wouldn't have been a world champion. And probably the same goes with Jenson Button and 2009. If it wasn't for Brown and the double diffuser, Jenson Button probably would have never had a world title. So I think the thing about James Hunt, he's not that overrated. More like people are having that special feeling regarding his persona, and that is why I think we shouldn't feel underwhelmed by his title or what he has achieved throughout his career.
I agree with you to some extent. Yes, I think that he is what he is because of the persona which was created around Rush. And in terms of most overrated champion, I'm not sure, because I think that there are better examples. For example, even KK Rosberg in 1982 with Williams, and he won only one race during that season and he still somehow won the championship. So maybe this is an even better example of an overrated F1 champion.
It's not about like who is like the worst F1 champion, for example, because it feels like you guys are kind of swinging that in that direction. But I just feel like, especially with the publicity that this season specifically has gotten, it has boosted James Hunt's image so high, and it's almost like he's one of the iconic champions of F1. And there's no denying that, because that season was iconic. But due to some outside factors that, put the championship in his favor, I think that specifically is what needs to be addressed.
I think what makes an F1 pilot and an F1 champion memorable is everything that was surrounding him throughout that specific season or throughout his whole career, and that is what makes him interesting, what makes him memorable. I think, talking about speed, he's probably nowhere near the best. But talking about interesting story and iconic moments, I think James Hunt, his championship, it has been very memorable. And F1 fans, nobody will ever tell you, he's super fast or that thing, but they're going to tell you, that season and the movie actually, Rush. It is very interesting, it is very memorable, and it is part of probably some of the best seasons in F1 history.
Okay. Well, I think this was another great discussion, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the second part of our F1 hot takes. This is all today from us. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us in AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook, and stay tuned for more of our content. Thank you, and remember,
if you no longer go for a gap that exists,
you're no longer a racing driver.